London at night was always magnificent, yet the penthouse on the 45th floor of the Sinclair building felt unbearably cold. Grace Bennett stood before the vast glass window, the city lights reflecting in her deep blue eyes. She held a cup of tea that had long gone cold, yet she made no effort to drink it. In front of her, on the table, lay a sheet of paper with two bolded words at the top: divorce agreement. Her hands trembled as her fingers traced the edge of the paper. Never had she thought the day would come when she would have to sign it. But what other choice did she have? Grace had loved Nathaniel Sinclair with all her heart. From the early days when he was just an ambitious young entrepreneur to the moment he rose to become the most powerful CEO in London, she had always stood by his side. They had once shared a love story that felt like a fairy tale, sweet, passionate, and as radiant as a summer sunset. But now that love had turned cold, just like the tea in her hands. Nathaniel was still Nathaniel, still handsome, still successful, but he was no longer the man she had fallen in love with. He had grown distant, consumed by billion-dollar deals, endless late-night meetings, and the dinners she had waited for in vain. He had forgotten her, forgotten the love they once had. She had tried, she had waited, she had been patient to the point of deceiving herself into believing things would get better. But this Valentine's Day, he hadn't even sent her a single message. A tear silently fell onto the page. Was this truly the end? Suddenly, the sound of the door opening broke the silence. She flinched and turned around. Nathaniel stood there, tall, striking in his dark suit, but with a weary face and empty eyes. She wondered, how long had it been since they had truly looked at each other? "You're still awake?" His voice was hoarse, exhausted from the long day. Grace didn't answer. She simply looked at him, an unspeakable pain swelling in her chest. Perhaps tonight would be the last time they were still husband and wife. Welcome to Soul Stories Puker. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a yes in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Chapter 1. A blissful past, a love that burned bright, a love beyond status. Do you believe in fate? Nathaniel's deep voice resonated through the stillness of the small cafe by the Thames. The London night shimmered, streetlights casting their reflections on the water, forming ethereal streaks of light like 1,000 twinkling stars. Grace Bennett gently stirred her coffee, a soft smile gracing her lips. She was born into luxury, the only daughter of the Bennett family, one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in England. She had everything: wealth, status, prestige, but no one had ever made her heart race like Nathaniel Sinclair. He was nothing like the privileged men she had met before, those who lived off their family's fortune, indulging in luxury without ever striving for anything themselves. Nathaniel had built his career from nothing. He had no influential family to pave the way for him, no powerful connections to orchestrate his success. All he had was a sharp mind, an unyielding ambition, and a heart that knew no limits. And that was what had drawn Grace to him from the very first moment. She remembered the first time they met. It was at a lavish charity gala, where successful businessmen and the elite gathered to flaunt their wealth and status. Grace never cared for such events. She had never felt at home in the world of extravagance and pretense. But that night she met Nathaniel. He was different from everyone else in the room. While others were busy networking for power and money, Nathaniel stood in a quiet corner, his sharp eyes observing everything. He wasn't there to boast. He was there to seek investment for his small, struggling startup. Back then, his company was nothing, unrecognized, unsupported, unheard of. But when he spoke to her about his dreams, about building a technology empire that could change the world, Grace was utterly captivated. For the first time in her life, she met someone who didn't care about her status or her name. He saw her for who she truly was, and she knew then that she had met the man who would change her life forever. Their love didn't happen instantly. At first, Grace was just a friend, a confidant who listened to Nathaniel as he navigated the hardships of building a company. But day by day, she realized she was falling for him. She loved the way he persevered, even when no one believed in him. She loved the way he worked tirelessly, willing to sacrifice everything to build his future. She loved the fire in his eyes when he spoke about what he believed in. And Nathaniel loved her too. Not because of her wealth, not because she was a Bennett. He loved her because she was Grace, a strong, intelligent woman who wasn't afraid of challenges. They had the most beautiful days of their lives together. Simple dates at small cafes instead of extravagant restaurants. Late-night conversations about their dreams and the future they wanted. Moments when a single glance was enough to know they belonged to each other. Nathaniel wasn't a perfect gentleman, but he loved her with everything he had. And Grace never regretted choosing him. But their love wasn't just romance. It was a journey filled with trials. Grace wasn't just Nathaniel's lover. She became his partner, the one person who believed in him when the world turned its back. When his company struggled, she didn't hesitate to use her family's influence to help him. She introduced him to investors, people a young entrepreneur like him could never have reached alone. She used her media expertise to bring attention to his company. She even stood against her family when they opposed her relationship with someone they deemed unworthy. But Grace didn't care. She knew Nathaniel never needed her wealth. All he needed was a chance, and she gave it to him. They endured failures together. They celebrated their first big contract together. And one night, under a sky full of stars, Nathaniel looked into her eyes and said, "Grace, I wouldn't have come this far without you." And she believed their love would never change. But she was wrong. The company grew. Nathaniel became busier. The mornings they used to share turned into empty spaces beside her when she woke up. The evening strolls they once enjoyed became late-night meetings that stretched until dawn. The loving texts that once made her heart race dwindled into short, distant messages. "I'm busy. We'll talk later." At first, Grace thought it was just a rough phase, that once things settled, he would return. She waited. For years she waited, but it never ended. He no longer looked at her the way he used to. Gone were the captivated stares when she spoke. Gone were the gentle smiles that once lit up their moments together. Gone were the little gestures that made her feel like she was his world. She had once been everything to him, but now work was his everything, and Grace's heart began to break, piece by painful piece. Chapter 2. Grace's Loneliness. Their penthouse remained as lavish as ever, crystal chandeliers casting shimmering light, luxurious furniture arranged to perfection, every piece of decor an emblem of opulence. But it was no longer a home. Once Grace had felt warmth the moment she stepped inside. The gentle scent of orchids, Nathaniel's favorite, lingered in the air. Golden lights bathed the space in a soft glow, and their laughter once echoed through the grand rooms. Now, only suffocating silence remained. She remembered when Nathaniel used to hold her hand in the kitchen, cooking together, sharing smiles as if they were the only two people in the world. She remembered the evenings they sat side by side, sipping wine, exchanging stories about their day. But those moments had long faded. Grace had tried everything to save their marriage. She believed that if she put in enough effort, if she did something special, Nathaniel would notice and things would change. She spent the entire afternoon preparing the perfect dinner. She carefully selected the freshest ingredients. Medium rare steak, just the way Nathaniel liked it. Creamy mushroom soup, the dish he often had when working late. A bottle of red wine imported from Italy, the one he once said paired perfectly with beef. She meticulously set the table. Fine porcelain plates, crystal glasses gleaming under candlelight. She straightened the chairs, neatly folded the napkins, then stepped back to admire her work. The table was set on the balcony, offering a breathtaking view of London at night. A soft breeze carried the scent of roses from the small garden she had tended herself. The city lights reflected off the glass railing, painting a picture that was both magnificent and heartbreakingly cold. She sighed, poured 2 glasses of wine, and sat down to wait. 7 p.m. Grace adjusted her hair, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her dress. She checked her phone. No messages. Maybe Nathaniel was on his way. Maybe he wanted to surprise her. 8 p.m. She glanced at the steak on the table. It was still warm but no longer steaming. She poured herself another glass of wine, taking a small sip. The phone remained silent. He still wasn't home. 9 p.m. The screen finally lit up. Nathaniel, I'm in a meeting. Don't wait for me. Just one sentence, no apology. Grace set the phone down, her expression devoid of surprise or anger. She was used to this. She had once hoped, once believed that if she just tried a little harder, Nathaniel would realize. But perhaps she had been wrong from the very beginning. She lifted her glass, her gaze drifting to the distant skyline. Today was their 4th wedding anniversary. Did he even remember? Grace wasn't sure anymore. She remembered when they used to talk for hours without growing tired. They would stay up late in small cafes by the Thames, discussing everything, from Nathaniel's bold business ideas and the projects he was passionate about to trivial daily musings. Whenever Nathaniel spoke about his dreams, his eyes lit up with an undeniable fire. Grace could listen for hours, not because she had to, but because she loved how much he believed in what he was doing. But now, their conversations lasted mere seconds, often filled with nothing but suffocating silence. She decided to try one more time. When Nathaniel stepped out of the dressing room, she was already waiting, dressed in an elegant white dress, her hair neatly tied up. She wasn't hoping for a compliment. She only wanted a little of his time. Nathaniel adjusted his tie as she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Can you come home early tonight?" Her voice was soft, filled with quiet longing. He hesitated for a brief moment, and for that fleeting second, she allowed herself to hope. But then, he grabbed his car keys, his voice void of emotion. "I'll try, but I might be busy." Grace let her hand fall away. She wasn't disappointed anymore. She wasn't even angry. She just smiled faintly and lowered her gaze to her shoes. "You're busy." That phrase had become his standard response, repeated so often it no longer surprised her. He was too busy to have dinner with her, too busy to remember the last time they had gone for a walk together, too busy to notice the way her eyes dimmed every time he said those words. Grace never resented him for being ambitious. She had once admired his relentless drive, had fallen in love with his passion, but she never thought success would come at the cost of being forgotten. Nathaniel no longer saw her. He was still there, but he no longer belonged to her. She silently watched as he stepped through the door. The door clicked shut. Another day passed without him. Grace sat in their usual cafe, staring at her untouched cappuccino. Outside, London bustled with life, but for her, the world had shrunk down to a marriage she was the only one holding on to. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen before finally typing, "Grace, what are you doing?" She set the phone down, resisting the urge to stare at the screen. 5 minutes. No reply. She glanced around the cafe, watching couples laughing, talking, holding hands as if nothing could tear them apart. A sharp pang twisted in her chest. She took a deep breath and sent another message. "Grace, I want to take a walk with you tonight. Just for a little while." When was the last time they had taken a walk together? Had it been over a year? Back when Nathaniel would still reach for her hand, pull her close, whispering sweet words into the night? She pressed her lips together. Now even a simple response from him felt like a luxury, a hopeless wait. 1 hour passed, 2 hours, the entire afternoon. Grace kept checking her phone. The screen showed 2 words, "Read." But no reply. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes locked onto the cold, indifferent text. Nathaniel wasn't too busy to reply. He simply no longer cared. She let out a soft laugh, a bitter, self-mocking sound. She had been a fool to keep hoping. She remembered the old days when they still felt like a real couple, when he would text her good morning, even though they would see each other in just a little while, when he would call just to ask if she had eaten, despite being too busy to take a lunch break himself, when he would reply to her messages immediately, even joking, "I will always answer you before even my most important client." Grace bit her lip, a dull ache settling in her chest. That was in the past. Now she was no longer his priority. Maybe. She never truly was. Grace picked up her phone once more. This time she wasn't expecting anything. She just wanted to write something she had kept in her heart for too long. Grace, do you remember the last time we went on a date? I miss those days. She hit send. Her screen lit up. Read, but no response. Grace let out a small, hollow laugh and set the phone down on the table. She wouldn't text him again. For the first time in months, Grace told herself she wouldn't send another message. If Nathaniel still cared, he would reach out to her. And if he didn't, she would accept the truth on her own. But even as she made that decision, her heart ached. Because deep down, Grace knew sometimes the most painful thing wasn't the unanswered messages. It was realizing that the person you love no longer wants to answer at all. The penthouse was silent in the London night. Grace opened her eyes, staring at the dark ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Ek baje raat. She turned onto her side, pulling the blanket over her shoulders, but the emptiness inside her refused to fade. Had Nathaniel come home yet? Quietly, she sat up, slipped on a thin cardigan, and stepped downstairs. She walked toward Nathaniel's office, the place he often retreated to when he came home late. She pushed the door open. Darkness, no glow from a laptop screen, no sound of typing, no Nathaniel. Grace stood frozen at the doorway, staring into the empty room. He hadn't even come home. She didn't need to call him to know the answer. She had heard it hundreds of times. I have work at the office. It didn't matter if it was 10 p.m., 1 a.m., or even 3 a.m. He always had work at the office. At first, Grace used to hope that he would explain, that there would be a reason that made sense. But over time, she stopped asking. Because every time she did, Nathaniel would only frown, sighing as if she were bothering him. You're overreacting, Grace. I'm just working hard for our future. Why can't you understand? Every time she expressed her disappointment, he treated it like a nuisance. She no longer knew what to say. Some days she wanted to scream, Nathaniel, do you even love me anymore? But she swallowed the words, because she already knew the answer. She didn't need him to say it, she could feel it. He was still her husband, but he no longer belonged to her. Grace turned away, walking silently toward the living room. She curled up on the sofa, hugging her knees, staring out at the city lights still twinkling in the distance. Something between them had broken. Not from a fight, not from a sudden tragedy, but from the small cracks that had built up over time. The unanswered messages, the dinners eaten alone, the conversations that lasted only seconds, their gazes meeting briefly but with no warmth left. The invisible wall she had tried so hard to break through. But now, she no longer had the strength. Grace leaned her head against the couch, realizing she had never felt this lonely before. The penthouse was too big, too empty. Or maybe it was her heart that was truly empty. Chapter 3, Breaking Point, the Charity Gala. The ballroom had never looked more magnificent. The Charity Gala, meticulously planned by Grace for months, was executed flawlessly. Crystal chandeliers hung high, casting a dazzling glow over the vast space, making it shimmer like a sky full of stars. Classical music floated through the air, blending with the soft, luxurious scent of imported candles, creating an atmosphere both elegant and extravagant. Every table was draped in pristine ivory linens, adorned with white roses in gleaming crystal vases. Fine wine had been poured into delicate glasses, swirling under the warm light. London's most powerful business figures engaged in lively conversation, laughter and toasts echoing through the grand hall. Grace walked among them, radiating effortless poise. She had been looking forward to this night, not just because it was an important event, but because she had wanted Nathaniel to be here with her. She had carefully chosen the wine he liked, the music he often listened to. She had thought that if he came, maybe he would feel at ease. Maybe he would smile at her. Maybe, just once, he would look at her the way he used to. But he didn't come. Grace kept her smile intact, exchanging pleasantries with esteemed guests, yet her gaze flickered toward the entrance again and again. Where was Nathaniel? Before leaving the house, she had texted him, Grace, I hope you'll come. This is important to me. No response. As the event neared its start, she sent another. Grace, can you make it? Still no response. When all the guests had taken their seats, she tried calling. The ringtone echoed, but no one picked up. She stared at her phone screen, the familiar wave of disappointment washing over her, so familiar now that she didn't even feel the pain anymore. She knew where Nathaniel was, at his office, or worse, he had completely forgotten. She wanted to be angry, but instead, all she felt was emptiness. Grace moved through the ballroom, the center of attention wherever she went. Her deep crimson evening gown hugged her curves in a way that was regal, yet effortlessly refined. The silk fabric cascaded with every step, catching the golden light like fine wine shimmering in a crystal goblet. Her long hair was styled in soft waves, each strand falling as if sculpted by an artist's hand. Her eyes, lined with precision, held a sharpness that masked the loneliness buried beneath them. Her lips painted in a bold shade of red, the color of passion, of power, but also of shattered dreams. Grace had always been the kind of woman who captured attention, but tonight she was more radiant than ever. Men whispered among themselves about her elegance, about the quiet strength she exuded. Women admired her confidence. Some even envied the perfection she seemed to embody. But no one knew that beneath all the glamour, she felt nothing but emptiness. No one knew she had spent the entire evening waiting for Nathaniel. No one knew she had searched for him in every guest who entered the room. No one knew how much she had hoped, but he wasn't here, and that hurt more than anything. Grace's fingers brushed against the diamond ring on her left hand. A memory surfaced. Nathaniel, holding her hand beneath a golden sunset, whispering that he would never make her wait. That promise now felt like a distant echo, spoken by a man she no longer recognized. She had waited for him all night, had wished for a fleeting moment of magic, for him to walk in, to seek her out in the crowd, to look at her the way he used to remember that she still mattered. But there was no such moment. She let her hand drop, her expression cooling ever so slightly, her smile becoming just a little more flawless. If he no longer looked at her the way he once did, she would not let him see her pain either. Grace lifted her wineglass to her lips, taking a slow sip. Whether Nathaniel was here or not, the night continued. She still had to shine, even if her heart was shattering beneath the dazzling lights of the grandest ballroom in London. Just as Grace struggled to suppress her disappointment, a deep, confident voice sounded beside her. "Grace Bennett, you are always the center of attention." The voice was rich and smooth, snapping her back to reality. She turned. Sebastian Hayes. He stood there, tall, striking, with sharp eyes that held a flicker of amusement. Sebastian was a man no one could ignore, a successful businessman, dangerously charismatic, the kind of man London's press often called the deadly charmer of the corporate world. Not only was he one of the biggest competitors of Sinclair Enterprises, but he had also never hidden his interest in Grace whenever they crossed paths at social events. And tonight was no exception. She could feel his gaze fixed on her, not just because she looked stunning, but because he had been watching her for a long time. Sebastian smirked, a smile that was both playful and laced with something more dangerous. "Would you like to dance?" He extended his hand toward her, his invitation unhurried, confident. Grace hesitated. The attention of the room was already shifting toward them. She knew that if she accepted, by tomorrow morning, every financial newspaper in London would be talking about it. She didn't want to be the subject of gossip. She didn't want to give anyone a reason to drag her name through the headlines, or worse, to use this against Nathaniel. Not that he would care. Her eyes swept over the ballroom, searching, hoping. Nathaniel was still nowhere to be seen. No message, no explanation, no sign that he would show up at all tonight. A bitter taste rose in her throat, as sharp as the wine she had been drinking alone. She had spent the entire evening waiting for the man who should have been by her side, but he hadn't come, and now she was done waiting. Grace took a slow breath, then placed her hand into Sebastian's. His touch was warm and firm, so different from the coldness she had grown used to in her marriage. "All right." Her voice was unnervingly steady. She knew she was making a bold choice, but why should she care? Nathaniel hadn't cared about her in a long time. The ballroom continued to buzz with conversation, the clinking of glasses and laughter filling the grand space. But for Nathaniel, the world stopped the moment he stepped inside. Grace. She stood in the center of the ballroom, breathtakingly beautiful. Her deep crimson gown clung to her silhouette, the open-back design revealing just enough to make her look like a masterpiece bathed in candlelight. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves. Her ocean blue eyes held something distant, something that made his chest tighten. But none of that compared to the real reason he couldn't breathe. She was with another man, Sebastian Hayes, a man who had everything a dangerous rival needed: charm, power, and most of all, an undeniable interest in Grace. Nathaniel watched as Sebastian held her hand, leaned in to whisper something into her ear, and she laughed. Laughed. That smile. How long had it been since he had seen it? A sharp bitterness clawed at his chest. He had missed too much. He had left her alone for too long, and now someone else was standing closer to her than he was. For the first time in a long time, Nathaniel felt fear. He couldn't allow this. He wouldn't allow this. Nathaniel moved. Grace had just placed her hand on Sebastian's shoulder, about to step into the dance, when she felt it. A warmth at her back, a presence she knew instantly. Before she could react, a strong hand gripped her waist, firm, unyielding, pulling her out of Sebastian's arms. Nathaniel. Grace's breath caught. She turned, locking eyes with him, steel gray eyes burning with restrained fury, laced with something even deeper: jealousy. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to them. Nathaniel's grip on her waist tightened ever so slightly, a silent declaration. And then his voice, low and commanding, sliced through the air. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm yet dangerously possessive. "But this is my wife." A hush swept through the ballroom. Sebastian arched a brow, a knowing smirk curling at the edge of his lips. But he didn't protest. Grace could feel the tension thickening around them, feel the rise and fall of Nathaniel's chest, his barely contained anger, his undeniable claim on her. She stood frozen, staring at the man who had ignored her for so long. And now, here he was. Nathaniel Sinclair, the man who had never shown up for her, never had time for her, was now standing here, holding on to her, declaring her as his in front of everyone. What was she supposed to feel? Anger, sadness, or heartbreak? Nathaniel hadn't attended a single one of her events in years. But now when he saw her with another man, he suddenly decided to show up. She didn't know whether to be furious or devastated. The entire ballroom watched in anticipation, waiting for her reaction. Nathaniel refused to let go, his gaze locked onto hers, unreadable, yet filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time. For the first time in forever, she saw jealousy. She saw possessiveness. And beneath it all, she saw pain. But was it too late? Grace swallowed hard, forcing down the emotions threatening to consume her. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice devoid of the warmth it once held. Nathaniel hesitated for the briefest second before answering, his voice so low only she could hear. "I'm here for you." Grace blinked, a sharp ache piercing through her chest. Now finally he realized what he was losing. But was there still time left to fix it? Chapter 5. Change, or just a fleeting moment. The charity gala had ended, but its echoes lingered in Grace's mind like a cold blade pressed against her heart. She didn't know what she had expected. Maybe deep down she had hoped that Nathaniel's late arrival could save something. Maybe she had wanted to believe that when he pulled her away from Sebastian, when he declared, "This is my wife," it was a sign of awakening. But as the doors of their vast penthouse shut behind them, all that remained was an unbearable silence. Grace turned away from the door, letting the emptiness consume her. Nothing had changed. Nathaniel was still Nathaniel. No words were spoken. They simply stood there, two strangers bound together by a marriage that had long lost its meaning. Nathaniel was still in his pristine suit, his tie loosened, his eyes distant and unreadable. He reached up to unfasten his cufflinks, but he didn't look at her. No explanation, no apology, just silence. It weighed down on Grace like a suffocating force. She had thought there would be a conversation. She had thought he would say something, anything, a reason, an apology, a sign that he cared. But Nathaniel said nothing. He was used to not explaining himself. He was used to leaving her behind and returning as if nothing had happened. She was tired of it. The sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floor echoed through the hollow space. She removed her diamond earrings, placing them on the dressing table with a small but sharp clink. Her fingers traced the soft silk of her gown. A perfect dress, a perfect appearance, a perfect image of Nathaniel Sinclair's wife. But it was all just a facade. She lifted her gaze to the mirror. A woman stared back at her, stunning, elegant, but her eyes were empty. Gone was the light of dreams. Gone was the spark of hope. All that remained was a weariness with no end in sight. She no longer felt heartbreak, only emptiness. Nathaniel stood behind her, watching her reflection. But Grace didn't turn around. She no longer wanted to look at him, because she had realized something. Her love had been dying for a long time, a silent night. Grace made her way to the kitchen, intending to get a glass of water. She hadn't expected to see Nathaniel there. But as she stepped inside, she saw his tall figure standing in the warm glow of the kitchen lights. 2 wine glasses sat on the counter, filled with deep red wine. Grace hesitated at the doorway, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice calm. Nathaniel turned, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "I thought we could sit and have a drink together." His voice was controlled, steady. She glanced at the glasses. A familiar scene, one they had once shared on countless nights back when their world had been just the two of them. Nathaniel picked up one glass and stepped closer, offering it to her. Grace slowly reached for it. Their fingers brushed. A fleeting touch, a touch that now felt unfamiliar. She lifted the glass, swirling the wine under the light. "So, what happened, Nathaniel?" Her voice was soft but devoid of warmth. "What suddenly made you want to spend time with me?" Nathaniel hesitated, just for a second. "I realized," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "that I let work pull me too far away." Grace let out a quiet, bitter laugh. She shook her head, lifting her gaze to meet his. "No, Nathaniel. Work didn't pull you away." She tilted her head slightly, her voice unwavering. "You chose it over me." Nathaniel stilled. Grace placed the untouched wine glass on the counter. "And now that it's too late, you suddenly remember that I exist?" Her tone was eerily calm. Nathaniel opened his mouth, to protest, to defend himself. But he had no excuse, because she was right. He had chosen work over her. He had let her slip through his fingers, ignored her, neglected her for years. And now, only when he realized he was losing her, he wanted to fix it? But she wasn't the same woman anymore. She wasn't the woman who would wait in endless silence, hoping for a man who had forgotten her. Nathaniel's eyes darkened with unspoken emotions. He watched her, studied her, as if searching for the woman who used to look at him with love. But she was no longer there. Grace met his gaze, but there was no warmth left in her eyes. Then, without another word, she turned away, leaving behind the untouched glass of wine, leaving behind what remained of their love. Chapter 6. A New Path. Entering her room, Grace opened her laptop, scrolling through her emails out of habit. A flood of event invitations, business reports, and thank you notes from partners filled her inbox. But then, a particular name caught her eye. Madison and Company. She froze, her heart clenched. Just for a second. Madison and Company. She had heard of them before, one of the most prestigious media corporations in New York, known for working with the world's largest brands. Grace took a slow, deep breath before clicking on the email. Subject: opportunity with Madison and Company, Director of Strategic Communications in New York. Dear Ms. Bennett, we have been following your work for years and are incredibly impressed by your achievements in strategic communications. With your expertise and vision, we believe you would be an invaluable asset to Madison and Company as we continue to expand. We would like to formally invite you to take on the role of Director of Strategic Communications at our headquarters in New York. This is an opportunity to lead high-impact international projects, work in a dynamic environment, and receive an attractive compensation package. We look forward to your response. Best regards, Jonathan Caldwell, Human Resources Director, Madison and Company. Grace read the email once, twice, then a third time. Her mind was blank. They wanted her to move to the U.S. They wanted her to take on a leadership role, an opportunity that anyone in her field would dream of. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have even considered it, because she couldn't leave London, because she couldn't leave Nathaniel. But this time, she had no reason to stay. She made her decision. She was leaving. Chapter 6, The Divorce Proposal. Grace sat quietly in her office, the soft golden glow of the lamp casting a warm light over her face, yet it could not hide the exhaustion in her eyes. In front of her lay a pristine white divorce agreement, neatly placed on the dark wooden desk. The pen in her hand trembled slightly. She had written countless proposals, signed dozens of important contracts, but this time, every stroke of the pen felt like a blade slicing through her heart. Taking a deep breath, she steadied her grip. If she was leaving, she couldn't afford to leave any reason to turn back. She didn't want pleas, arguments, or painful negotiations. She didn't want money. She didn't want assets. She didn't want compensation. She just wanted freedom. She wanted to live for herself. Nathaniel could keep everything that belonged to him: the company, the luxurious penthouse, the expensive cars. Everything except her. The only thing she would take with her was herself. Her gaze swept across the room. This room. It had once been the place where she and Nathaniel sat together for hours, mapping out their dreams for the future. It had once been the place where he would wrap his arms around her from behind, chuckling softly as he watched her lost in her work. It had once been the place where he would press gentle kisses to her hair, whispering sweet words that made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. Now it was nothing but an empty space. No more laughter, no more warmth, no more love. Grace tightened her grip around the pen. It was over. She lifted the pen to the paper and began to write. I, Grace Bennett, agree to divorce Nathaniel Sinclair. Each word cut deeper than the last. She remembered the long nights she spent waiting for him to come home, only to be disappointed. She remembered the mornings she woke up alone in a cold, empty bed. She remembered all the times she tried to hold on to him, only to be met with silence. Stroke by stroke, letter by letter, she bled onto the page. The final words settled into the document. A single tear fell. She stared at the stain it left, but she didn't wipe it away, because this would be the last time she cried for Nathaniel. She folded the divorce papers into an envelope and placed it gently on the dining table. Beside it, she slipped the wedding ring from her finger and set it atop the papers. The diamond glinted under the light, a symbol of the love she had once cherished. She had once thought she would wear it forever, but now there was no reason to keep it anymore. Grace sank into the sofa, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea as she waited. She no longer cared if Nathaniel came home early or late. She no longer waited for miracles. She was done waiting. Chapter 7, The Final Goodbye. Nathaniel stepped into the penthouse, his leather shoes making deep, steady sounds against the wooden floor. Everything seemed the same, but it wasn't. The air in the house felt heavier than usual. The silence was deafening. He entered the living room and found her standing by the window, cradling a cup of tea that had long gone cold. He cleared his throat, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "You're still awake?" Grace didn't answer. She simply looked at him, her eyes unreadable, filled with an emotion so heavy that even she couldn't name it. Then she turned away. His gaze drifted downward. A white envelope lay neatly on the table, and beside it, her wedding ring. The diamonds shimmered under the light, but to Nathaniel it looked lifeless. His chest tightened. A sense of unease clawed at his ribs as he reached for the envelope. The first words on the page hit him like a punch to the gut. Divorce agreement. Nathaniel froze. His hands trembled, but the weight crushing his heart was even worse. Slowly he turned toward her. She was still standing by the window, her delicate silhouette reflected in the glass. She didn't say anything. No accusations, no tears. Just a silence so cold and vast it felt like an abyss between them. And then he understood. She had given up. Nathaniel gripped the document tighter, his expression darkening. "No!" His voice was hoarse yet firm. "Grace, you can't do this." She finally turned to face him. Her eyes were calm, Not angry, not broken, just done. I can, she said softly, and I will. She stepped toward him, but not to reach for him, not to comfort him like she used to. Instead, she picked up the ring and placed it in his palm. His hand felt ice cold. Grace! He said her name as if saying it could make her stay, but she didn't stop. Nathaniel panicked. He wasn't used to this feeling. Losing control. Nathaniel Sinclair, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, a man who controlled everything in his life. For the first time, he felt fear. He was going to lose her. He was going to lose the only woman who had ever loved him for who he was, not for his money, not for his power. His grip tightened around the papers, his voice cracking. Grace, do you really want nothing from me? She gave him a small, bittersweet smile. Number, I came to you for love, and now I leave for the same reason, because the love I had for you is gone. Her words sliced straight through his soul. Nathaniel had never been good at expressing emotions, but in this moment, he felt like he was dying. Grace, give me a chance. She shook her head. Nathaniel, I gave you so many chances. I can change. He stepped forward, desperation leaking into his voice. I can fix this. Grace inhaled deeply, as if absorbing this moment. Then she met his gaze. But I can't. Nathaniel stilled. Her voice was unwavering. You only change when you realize you're about to lose me, Nathaniel. But love isn't something you only value when it's slipping through your fingers. She paused, letting the words settle. I waited for you for too long. And now I can't wait anymore. Silence engulfed them. Nathaniel felt the ground beneath him crumble. He had taken her presence for granted. He had assumed she would always be there. But now she wouldn't be. Grace turned away, walking toward the staircase. Nathaniel stood there, frozen, helpless, his hand clenching the wedding ring that no longer belonged to her. And this time, she was truly leaving. Chapter 7. The True Awakening. The Darkness of Emptiness. The door clicked shut behind Grace with a soft, almost gentle sound. But in Nathaniel's mind, it echoed like a death knell. She was gone. Not in the heat of an argument, not in a moment of anger that would eventually pass. This time, she had truly walked out of his life. The penthouse was empty. Nathaniel stood frozen in place, swallowed by the unbearable silence. He could hear the ticking of the clock, each second dragging on like a cruel taunt. No more familiar footsteps down the hallway. No more faint trace of her perfume in the air when she passed him. No more small figure curled up in her favorite armchair, engrossed in a book. Everything felt hollow. His eyes flickered around the room, as if searching for some trace of her. But nothing was out of place. Everything was as neat and perfect as ever. Except, she was no longer here. Nathaniel collapsed into a chair, gripping the divorce papers with trembling hands. His fingers tightened around the document, knuckles turning white. Divorce agreement. Her signature lay at the bottom. Neat, final. No demands, no conditions, no hesitation. She hadn't fought for money. She hadn't tried to claim assets. She hadn't even left him a note. She had simply walked away. Grace didn't want anything from him anymore. Not his wealth, not his power, not even an explanation. She had come to him for love. And now she was leaving for the same reason, because he had failed to cherish the love she had given him. Nathaniel had faced billion-dollar negotiations, high-stakes deals, and the crushing weight of corporate decisions. But he had no idea how to face this. He had always thought Grace would be there, that once his work settled, everything between them would naturally fall back into place, that love could survive without being nurtured. He had been so wrong. She hadn't left because she had stopped loving him. She had left because she was exhausted, and that was what crushed him the most. He hadn't lost her to another man. He hadn't lost her because of betrayal. He had lost her to himself. Nathaniel's gaze swept the apartment once more. The penthouse still gleamed with luxury, but it was no longer home. Without Grace, nothing mattered. Without Grace, it was just cold, lifeless walls. He reached out, touching the armchair where she used to sit. It was cold. He turned toward the door, half expecting her to walk back in. But she wouldn't. Not unless he did something. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel Sinclair felt true fear. He could lose her forever. Not for a day, not for a week. Forever. And in that moment, he finally understood. He could lose his company, his fortune, his entire empire. But nothing terrified him more than losing Grace. Chapter 8. The Letters She Never Sent. The penthouse had been empty for 3 days. Tonight, the vast space was swallowed by darkness, the only light coming from the distant glow of London's skyscrapers, filtering through the glass windows. Everything remained untouched. The luxurious furniture, the carefully arranged artwork, nothing had been disturbed. Except for one thing. Grace was no longer here. Nathaniel walked toward the bedroom, his steps heavy, as if the weight of the entire world pressed down on his shoulders. When he pushed the door open, emptiness greeted him like a crushing blow to his chest. The closet, empty. The vanity, bare. The bed they had once shared, cold and lifeless. She had taken everything except the one thing that haunted him most, the memories. He saw her everywhere. In the armchair by the window where she used to curl up with a book on rainy nights. At the vanity where she would try on a new shade of lipstick, turning to him with a playful smile asking, "Does this color suit me?" On his side of the bed, where she used to reach for him in the cold, seeking warmth from the man she had once loved more than anything. But they were only shadows now, ghosts of what once was. Nathaniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside him. How long had he been sitting there? Time felt meaningless. Then something caught his eye, a small wooden box tucked away on the bookshelf. A memory stirred. His heart pounded as he reached for it, dust clinging to his fingertips, a sign that it had been untouched for far too long. With hesitant fingers, he lifted the lid. Letters. Grace's letters. Letters he had never seen before. His hand trembled as he picked one up. The paper had yellowed slightly with time, but her delicate handwriting remained unmistakable. February 14th, 3 years ago. Today is our 3rd wedding anniversary. Do you remember? I planned a special dinner, but you texted me that you had an important meeting. I should be used to it by now, but I still hoped you'd come home early, just this once. Nathaniel gripped the letter tightly. He didn't remember that day. He only remembered a never-ending series of meetings, deals that consumed every hour. He had forgotten that she had waited for him. He had forgotten that she had hoped. Swallowing hard, he opened another. Grace's birthday, 2 years ago. It's my birthday today, but I suppose you forgot. I'm not angry. I bought my own cake, lit my own candles, and made my own wish. I wish that you would have time for me, but I guess that's too much to ask. Nathaniel felt like he couldn't breathe. How many birthdays had she spent alone? How many anniversaries had passed without him even noticing? And then, he found the letter that was most worn, the edges folded and unfolded countless times, as if she had read and rewritten it over and over, but never sent it. There was no date. I miss you, Nathaniel, but I don't know if you even miss me anymore. The room blurred before his eyes. His breathing turned shallow. How lonely had she been? How much had she loved him, only to be left in silence? Every word she wrote stabbed into his heart like a dagger, each one deeper than the last. She had spent years waiting for him, and he had never noticed. Nathaniel clenched the letters in his fists, his hands trembling. He had told himself that he had done everything for Grace, that his long hours, his relentless drive, his sacrifices were all for their future. But in the end, he had only built a future without her in it. And now she was gone. Now he was left with nothing but these letters and the suffocating darkness of regret. Nathaniel's gaze fell on the divorce papers still lying on the desk. His jaw clenched, his fingers curled into a fist. He couldn't sign them. He couldn't let her go. But he also knew words wouldn't bring her back. He had promised too much and delivered too little. This time, he had to prove it. This time, he would do whatever it took to bring her back. Even if it meant starting from nothing. Even if it meant making her fall in love with him all over again. Chapter 8. Begging for one last chance. The day Grace left. The London sky was heavier than usual, blanketed by thick gray clouds, foreshadowing the storm about to descend upon the city. At the airport, Grace walked toward the security checkpoint, her suitcase rolling smoothly behind her. Today, she was leaving London. She had prepared herself for this moment, a fresh start, a life unchained from the past, free from the lonely nights of waiting for a man who never came home. She had thought she would feel relief, yet deep inside something heavy still pressed against her heart. No matter how much she tried to deny it, she still loved Nathaniel. But love alone was no longer enough to keep her here. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, ready to step forward. But just as she was about to pass through security, a familiar voice echoed through the terminal. "Grace!" Her breath hitched. She turned around and froze. Nathaniel stood amidst the bustling crowd. No tailored suit, no distant, unreadable expression. He looked different. His eyes no longer held that unshakable arrogance, that quiet confidence he always carried. Instead, they were filled with desperation, with fear, as if he knew that if he didn't act now, he would lose her forever. "Before you go," he said, his voice rough, his chest rising and falling as if he had been running, "have dinner with me, one last time." A dinner from the past. Grace hesitated. She shouldn't make this harder. She had already decided. But when she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet plea beneath his words, she found herself whispering, "Just one dinner." Nathaniel nodded. "Just one dinner." Nathaniel took her to a small restaurant by the Thames. The moment Grace stepped inside, her heart clenched. It was the place of their first date. The place where Nathaniel had once looked at her with pure adoration, held her hand, and promised he would protect her for the rest of his life. Memories flooded back like a tidal wave. They sat down at a small table by the window, overlooking the river. Nathaniel didn't say much, he just watched her, as if he were memorizing every detail. The way her lashes fluttered when she looked away, the way she toyed with the edge of her napkin, the way the candlelight reflected in her eyes. Grace sighed softly. "Nathaniel," she finally spoke, breaking the silence, "you don't have to do this. My decision is made." He was quiet for a moment before finally placing his hands on the table. "I know," he said. His voice was deep, steady. "I know you don't believe in me anymore." She looked away. "I know the changes I made before. They weren't real. They were temporary." His voice softened. "I changed because I was afraid of losing you, not because I truly understood what I had done." Her hands tightened under the table. "But Grace..." Nathaniel took a deep breath. Then slowly he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Grace's heart stopped. He opened it. Inside was a new ring. "I forgot how to love you." His voice wavered for the first time. "But if you let me, I'll learn again." Grace stared at him, stunned. She looked at the ring, then at him. For the first time, she saw not the powerful CEO, not the man who ruled boardrooms with ease, but a man who was simply asking for another chance. His hands, steady when signing billion-dollar contracts, were trembling. His voice, commanding in any negotiation, was pleading. "Grace," he said her name like a prayer. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to make things right." Her heart wavered. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this time he truly understood. But could she? She clenched her hands, inhaling shakily. "Nathaniel," she whispered. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you're afraid. I know you don't want to be hurt again." His voice turned raw, vulnerable. "But this time, I won't let that happen." She had never seen his hands shake before, never seen him shake before. She studied him for a long moment. Then without a word, she stood up and left. Nathaniel sat there frozen, the ring still in his hands. His heart plummeted. She had walked away. But as the hours passed, as his phone remained silent, one thing became clear. She had left the restaurant, but she hadn't gotten on the plane. Instead of heading to the airport, Grace returned to her apartment. She lay in bed all night, her mind racing through everything. She loved Nathaniel. She had always loved him, But love wasn't enough to erase the pain. It wasn't enough to restore the broken trust. Had he truly changed? Or was this just another desperate effort, only for her to fall back into the same cycle? Loneliness, disappointment, neglect. She couldn't go through that again, but at the same time she realized something else. She didn't just want to give Nathaniel a chance, she wanted to give herself a chance too. Nathaniel didn't pressure her for an answer. He didn't demand forgiveness, instead he acted. The next morning, Grace received a simple text from him. "I won't chase you, I won't beg, but if you let me, I will prove to you that this time, I'm truly different." She didn't reply, but Nathaniel didn't stop. He started prioritizing his life differently. He delegated most of his corporate responsibilities, trusting his team to run the company in his absence. No more late nights at the office. No more meetings that stretched until morning. For the first time in years, he made time for himself and for her. He began showing up at the cafe near her work, not to talk to her, not to beg, just to sit in the corner, reading a book, waiting for her to finish her day. One day she received a handwritten letter from him, the first one since their wedding. "Grace, I know you won't forgive me easily, and you shouldn't, but I won't stop trying. I will learn how to love you again, day by day, if you'll let me." Her heart wavered, but she still wasn't ready. Days passed, and slowly Grace began to notice. Nathaniel wasn't the same man anymore. He started calling her, not for work, not to ask anything of her, just to ask how her day had been. He began walking with her in the mornings, not saying much, just being there. No more missed messages, no more forgotten dinners. Nathaniel was learning how to put her first, and she couldn't ignore it. One morning she woke up to find a small note on her table, written in his familiar handwriting. "Today I'm taking you somewhere special. No work, no meetings. Just us." She smiled. She put on a simple dress and stepped outside. Nathaniel was waiting, not in a tailored suit, not as CEO Nathaniel Sinclair, but as just Nathaniel. His eyes held something she hadn't seen in years. Hope, a place they had forgotten. Nathaniel drove her to a small garden on a hill outside London. It wasn't grand, it wasn't lavish, but it was filled with memories. "This place," Grace whispered. Nathaniel nodded. "Where we once promised to build a future together." Grace felt her heart tighten. She had buried these memories, convinced they no longer mattered. But standing here now, she realized they still did. Nathaniel turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "I once forgot what was most important in my life." He took her hands in his, firm, steady, full of quiet devotion. "But this time I won't lose you again." Grace looked at him for a long time. She didn't need grand words. She didn't need empty promises. She just needed to see the change. And this time, she did. The true meaning of love. Love isn't just a feeling. Love is action. A relationship cannot survive if only one person fights for it. Neglect, whether intentional or not, kills love faster than any betrayal ever could. Success can never replace the moments you lose. And sometimes apologies come too late. Because happiness isn't in power, wealth, or ambition. It's in cherishing the one who loves you before it's too late. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together. Chapter 1. A Fateful Encounter in the Bathroom. Nathan Wanala pushed open the bathroom door, one hand scrolling quickly across his phone screen, his mind still occupied with thoughts of the important meeting the next morning. A long day filled with numbers and contracts had drained him, and now all he wanted was to stand under the hot water, letting the steam wash away the lingering tension in his body. But the moment the door swung open, he froze. The air inside was thick with steam, clinging to the mirror's surface in misty streaks. Water continued to drip from the shower head, splashing against the cold marble floor. and right in the middle of the dense fog, a mysterious figure emerged. Nathan blinked, his heartbeat faltering for a split second. A woman. She spun around at the sound of the door, her bright blue eyes widening in shock, her breath hitching as if suddenly cut off. Time stood still. Caroline. She stood there, wet hair cascading over her bare shoulders, droplets of water trailing lazily down her porcelain-like skin. A hastily wrapped towel clung to her body, too thin to fully obscure the curves that were accentuated by the dim golden light. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Neither spoke, neither moved. Her gaze flickered, not just with embarrassment, but with hatred. A sharp, searing hatred that sliced through the air between them, leaving Nathan slightly unsettled. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She didn't panic. She just stood there frozen, her sharp eyes full of wariness. A strange feeling stirred within Nathan. He had encountered plenty of women in similar situations. Most of them would either blush furiously or feign modesty while secretly attempting to entice him. But Caroline was different. She despised him, and she made no effort to hide it. Damn it. What are you doing here? Her voice was hoarse from shock, yet remarkably steady. Nathan raised an eyebrow, quickly regaining his usual composure, even as something unexplainable stirred inside him. I should be the one asking you that, he replied, his voice deep and husky. She gripped the towel tighter around her body, her lips pressed into a firm line. Nathan could see her chest rising and falling rapidly, but she held her ground, stepping back to put distance between them. She was nothing like the other house staff in this mansion, those who always bowed their heads in fear, too timid to meet his gaze. Nathan should have looked away. He should have walked out immediately, but he didn't. Instead, he stood still, his eyes trailing over her face. Those fiery blue eyes, that elegantly sculpted nose, and the soft lips she was biting down on to suppress her emotions. A breathtakingly beautiful woman, but it wasn't just that. She was proud, and she wasn't afraid of him. What the hell was happening? Caroline took a deep breath, finally breaking the silence. The staff's bathroom is out of water. Her voice was still slightly unsteady, but her determination remained. I didn't think anyone was here, so I used this one. Nathan blinked, his brows drawing together slightly. She thought no one was here, so she hadn't done this on purpose. A strange thought flickered through his mind. He should have been angry that someone had trespassed into his private bathroom, but instead, his curiosity deepened. Caroline met his gaze head-on, as if daring him to challenge her. A heavy silence stretched between them. She quickly stepped past him, eager to escape this bizarre situation as soon as possible. But just as she brushed by, a firm hand wrapped around her wrist. She froze. The warmth of Nathan's palm seeped into her skin. He didn't understand himself. Why had he stopped her? His voice was raspier than he expected, but he blinked, regaining clarity. This is my room. Caroline yanked her wrist free, her eyes turning icy as she stared straight at him. Is that so? Her voice was eerily calm, but her gaze burned. Then I apologize, Mr. Wanala. She emphasized the last two words with biting sarcasm before spinning on her heel and walking away without a backward glance. The bathroom door slammed shut behind her. Nathan stood there enveloped in the lingering steam, his heart still racing for reasons he couldn't quite understand. Her scent still lingered in the air, a soft trace of vanilla mixed with something wilder. He felt unsettled, a little confused, a little intrigued. But more than anything, he couldn't get her out of his mind, and that was more dangerous than anything else. Welcome to Soul Stories, Punje. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a I am happy in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Chapter 2. Nathan's Obsession, the More He Wants to Conquer. Nathan Wanala couldn't stop thinking about her. Since that fateful night in the bathroom, Caroline's image had haunted him in ways he couldn't explain. During the day, while sitting in high-rise office meetings, he would suddenly recall her delicate face amid the swirling steam, those sharp blue eyes betraying a flicker of unease. At night, lying in bed, instead of thinking about work or the many women who had come and gone in his life, he found himself remembering the way her lips pressed together in defiant pride, her unwavering gaze pushing him away. This wasn't normal. Nathan had never been fixated on a woman before. He could have anyone he wanted, easily. But with Caroline, it felt as if she was the one controlling him, and that was something he couldn't tolerate. She avoided him. She rejected every bit of attention he gave her, and that only made him want to conquer her more. Nathan had always believed that money could buy anything. Women had always sought his favor, seizing every opportunity to get his attention, willing to do anything for a place in his life. A lavish dinner, a brand new sports car, a piece of exquisite jewelry. With the slightest gesture from him, they would come running, like moths drawn to a flame. But Caroline, she didn't care. He invited her to dinner. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" he asked, his voice laced with intrigue. Caroline looked up, her expression eerily calm. "Sorry, sir, but I have other things to do." Nathan narrowed his eyes. What could be more important than dinner with me? Doing my job as a housekeeper? She gave a small, polite smile before turning away. He offered her a raise. He knew she needed money. She had a younger brother to take care of, hospital bills for her father. Yet when he proposed doubling her salary, she simply declined without hesitation. "I don't need it. My current salary is enough to cover my expenses. I don't want to owe you anything." Nathan couldn't believe his ears. Who refuses money from him? He tried gifting her something expensive. One day he left a small box on his office desk, a pair of exquisite diamond earrings, custom made just for her. Caroline walked in, picked it up, examined it for a long moment. Then she calmly closed the box and placed it right back where she found it. No questions, no hesitation, no sign of desire. Nathan had never met anyone like her. Everything he had, money, power, charm, was useless against her. She wasn't swayed, she wasn't tempted, and it drove him insane. The harder she was to get, the more he wanted to conquer. Nathan Wanala had never been rejected by a woman before. He was used to being in control. But with Caroline, everything was turned upside down. She refused every attempt he made to get closer. She avoided his gaze. She made sure never to cross paths with him. She treated him as if he were just another stranger in the mansion. But what she didn't realize was that it only made him more determined. Nathan wasn't one to give up. If money couldn't buy her, if power couldn't shake her, then he would find another way to make sure she couldn't ignore him. Because now, more than ever, he didn't just want to conquer her. He wanted her heart. He started appearing in front of her on purpose. Before, he had never paid much attention to the household staff. But ever since Caroline arrived, everything had changed. He started staying home more often, appearing in places she was bound to be. Every day he found a way to accidentally cross paths with her just to see her a little longer, to exchange even the shortest conversation. That day, Caroline was cleaning the library. She stood on a ladder, reaching up to dust the highest bookshelves, her slender frame focused entirely on her task. Nathan passed by, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her. After a moment, he decided to speak. "I'm on my way to the kitchen," he said casually, his deep voice effortlessly smooth. Caroline paused slightly but didn't turn around immediately. She finished wiping another shelf before responding, her voice light. "Really?" Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Obviously." This time, Caroline slowly turned, her deep blue eyes locking onto his. "Sir, the kitchen is in the opposite direction." Nathan froze for a second. Clearing his throat, he turned and walked in the right direction, as if that had been his plan all along. Admiring the garden, but only looking in one direction. The sky was clear that day, sunlight gently filtering through the canopy of leaves. Caroline was watering the flower beds, her hair swaying lightly with the breeze. Nathan stepped outside, a cup of coffee in hand, pretending to enjoy the fresh air. He stood in a corner, eyes fixed on her. Minutes passed, yet Caroline remained focused on her task. Then suddenly she turned around, her gaze meeting his. Caroline tilted her head slightly, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "You like this garden?" Nathan nodded immediately. "Very much." Caroline glanced around. "Which plant is your favorite?" Nathan froze. Plants. They all looked the same. In the end, he pointed randomly at a nearby bush. "This one?" Caroline followed his gaze. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then she turned back to him, her smile widening. "That's a weed." Nathan stiffened. He looked down at the poor little plant struggling to grow from the soil. Then, maintaining as much composure as possible, he took a slow sip of his coffee and nodded thoughtfully. Weeds have their own unique beauty. But she said nothing more. She simply returned to her work, leaving Nathan standing there, embarrassed by his own blunder. Yet that didn't discourage him. In fact, he considered it progress. Rather than facing her cold indifference, having his clumsy coincidences exposed was far better. He still had a chance, and he would find more ways to get close to her. Nathan came up with new excuses to call her to his room. His coffee was still full, still warm, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he wanted to see Caroline. He pressed the intercom button, his deep voice carrying undeniable authority. "Caroline, bring me a cup of coffee." A few minutes later, she walked in. No emotion, no complaints, no visible reaction. She simply placed the cup on his desk with practiced professionalism, as if he were just another task on her checklist. Then, without so much as a glance, she turned to leave. Nathan frowned slightly. Did she really not realize his request was just an excuse? He cleared his throat, lifting the cup, intentionally holding her gaze a little longer. "Aren't you curious why I asked for another coffee when the old one is still untouched?" Caroline paused, turning her head slightly to look at him. Then her eyes flickered to the previous cup sitting on his desk. Then back to him. 1 second. 2 seconds. Finally, she simply replied, "No," and walked out of the room. Nathan stood frozen. He had never been so blatantly ignored before. But rather than deterring him, it only fueled his desire to conquer her even more. A different kind of battle. On another day, Nathan shuffled a few stacks of documents on his desk, deliberately creating a bit of chaos. Then he called Caroline in. She entered, her sharp gaze waiting for him to speak. "My files are a mess. Organize them." Caroline looked down at his desk. She picked up a folder, flipping through its pages slowly. Everything was already perfectly categorized. Neat, organized, flawless. There wasn't a single sign of the mess he had just claimed. She lifted her eyes, calm yet piercing. "A mess?" Nathan maintained his serious expression. "A complete mess." Caroline exhaled quietly, placing the folder back down. Then she simply said, "Then I'll organize it." Nathan smirked slightly. He could sense the irritation hidden in her precise, controlled movements. But she still did it. Professional, composed, giving him no opening to stretch the conversation longer than necessary. 30 minutes later, she gave him a curt nod. "Done, sir." Then she turned and left before he could say another word. Nathan sat there watching her retreating figure. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he had just lost a round. But that was fine. She could keep her distance, but Nathan wouldn't give up. Nathan knew she was trying to push him away. She kept her distance, maintaining an impeccable coldness. But he lived by one rule: the harder it was, the more he wanted it. And Caroline, she was the most intriguing challenge of his life. That night, after a grueling business meeting, Nathan returned home late, the scent of whiskey still lingering on him. He wasn't actually drunk, but he wanted to see what would she do if he lost control. He staggered into the living room, where Caroline was cleaning the fireplace. "Caroline." His voice was lower, rougher than usual, laced with a hint of feigned intoxication. She looked up, her icy blue eyes steady. She didn't panic. She didn't rush over to steady him like other women would. Nathan took a slow step forward, his gaze locked onto hers, his movements slightly unsteady, deliberately so, as if seeking an anchor. Caroline didn't step back, but she also didn't rush to help him. Nathan let out a quiet chuckle. She was too smart to fall for it, and yet after a few seconds, she still moved toward him. Not because she was drawn to him, but because she was a good person. She reached for his arm lightly but kept enough distance that he had no chance to take advantage of the moment. "You need to rest, Mr. Wanala." Her voice was gentle but firm. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. She really wasn't tempted. Unlike other women who would have used this as an opportunity to get closer to him, to leave an impression on him, Caroline stood her ground. She never let him touch her, and that only made him want her more. Caroline couldn't be bought with money. She wasn't swayed by his charm. She wasn't weak, nor was she ambitious. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. Nathan was losing control. For the first time in his life, he was experiencing an emotion he had never felt before. He wanted her, but not in the way he had ever wanted anyone else. He wanted her to come to him willingly, not for money, not for power, but for him, and that was what truly terrified him. Chapter 3. Nathan discovers the truth. The sky was overcast that day, weak rays of sunlight barely filtering through the large office window of Nathan Wanala. It was just another ordinary day, or at least that's what he had thought. Sitting at his desk, he absent-mindedly skimmed through the mansion's employee records, a casual habit, something he had never truly paid much attention to. But then his eyes stopped on a name, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Caroline Smith. He blinked, but the name remained. An uneasy feeling stirred within him, an inexplicable sense of foreboding he couldn't immediately rationalize. He pulled out her file, flipping through the pages slowly, as if his mind had already anticipated something it wasn't quite ready to accept. And then his gaze landed on a single line. Father's name, William Smith. A violent jolt shot through him. His fingers clenched around the edge of the folder, knuckles turning white. His heartbeat thundered, so loud it echoed in his chest. It couldn't be. William Smith. That name. It was nothing more than a forgotten fragment of the past. Something he had never spared a second thought. But now it was back, like a ghost rising from the shadows, dragging with it a terrifying truth he could no longer escape. 3 years ago, Wanala Corporation executed one of the most ruthless takeovers in history. Smith Enterprises, a promising family-run company, was driven to the brink of collapse overnight. Nathan had no involvement in the deal. He had only heard about it in passing, casual conversations between his father, Alexander Wanala, and his business associates. They mocked William Smith's incompetence. They spoke of how he had been destroyed, how he had lost everything, his family, his reputation, his fortune. Nathan hadn't cared. To him, it was just another victory in an endless string of corporate battles his family had won. But now, he couldn't breathe. Because Caroline, the one woman he wanted to conquer, was the daughter of that very man. She wasn't just any woman, she was a victim. And whether directly or indirectly, he was part of the force that had ruined her life. For the first time in his life, Nathan felt guilt. A suffocating weight pressed against his chest. His fingers clenched around the file, crumpling the edges of the paper. The pieces of the puzzle in his mind began to fall into place. He remembered the ice in Caroline's eyes whenever she looked at him, her distant demeanor, her unshakable pride, the way she rejected everything he offered her, money, attention, even a simple dinner. She knew. She had known who he was from the very beginning, and she despised him. Nathan shot up from his chair, his sharp gaze clouded with turmoil. This was no longer a game. This was no longer just desire. Caroline would never accept him, because he carried the name Wanala, the name that had shattered her life, that had torn her family apart, that had forced her to abandon her dreams and work as a maid in the very home of her enemy. A foreign feeling surged through Nathan's chest, one he had never experienced before. It wasn't the hunger of wanting a woman, it was a deeper fear, the fear that she would never forgive him. Nathan took a deep breath, but it did nothing to calm him. He had always believed he could have any woman he wanted. But this time, he didn't know what to do. Not because she challenged him, not because she rejected him, but because she was Caroline. Too different, Too strong, too proud. She wasn't a fleeting indulgence. She was a storm that could tear through everything inside him. And now, staring at the truth, a terrifying question settled in his mind. Could she ever forgive him? Could he hold on to her when their past was drenched in cruelty? His grip tightened on the file as he shut his eyes. A sense of helplessness seeped into every inch of his being. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, Nathan Wanala feared he had already lost Caroline, before he had even had her. Chapter 4. The Tense Confrontation. Nathan waited for Caroline in the mansion's library. Outside, the sky was pitch black. The flickering light from the fireplace cast long, wavering shadows across the room, draping it in a thick, suffocating tension. He leaned against his desk, gripping a thin file, her file so tightly that the edges crumpled in his grasp. He had read that name over and over again today, and now the person bearing that name was about to walk into this room. A part of him wanted to pretend he didn't know, but he couldn't. The door creaked open. Caroline stepped in, her long hair neatly tied back, her navy blue uniform as crisp and perfect as ever. There was no sign that she had any idea what was coming. "You called for me?" Her voice was calm as always. Nathan stared at her, his chest tightening. She stood there completely unaware that he had uncovered her secret. The moment she stepped further inside, Nathan reached out and slammed the door shut behind her. She froze. He didn't give her a chance to react. His voice was low, controlled. "You're Caroline Smith." Silence, a deadly pause stretched between them. Nathan could see her breathing slow, but then she lifted her head, her gaze unwavering. "So, you investigated me." Her voice didn't waver in the slightest. Nathan narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "You knew from the start, didn't you?" He took a step closer, his voice sharper now. "Did you come here to get revenge on me?" His question cut through the space between them like a blade. Caroline stilled. Then suddenly she let out a laugh. A bitter, hollow laugh. "Revenge?" she repeated, arching an eyebrow, her voice razor sharp. "And what exactly could a housekeeper do to a billionaire like you?" Nathan stiffened. She didn't deny it, but she didn't falter either. Caroline took a step forward, her piercing gaze locking onto his. "You think I deliberately got close to you?" she asked, her voice tightening, but never breaking. Nathan didn't respond, because that was exactly what he had assumed. Caroline inhaled deeply before speaking again, each word cutting through him like a knife. "I don't have time for stupid revenge schemes. I have a younger brother to care for, a father to support. I took this job because I needed money, not because I wanted to be here." The air between them grew suffocating. Her words sliced through him with brutal precision. Nathan clenched his fists. His pride had been shattered. He had always believed he could have anything he wanted. He had power, wealth, absolute control. But with Caroline, he had nothing. She didn't care about him, not because he was Nathan Wanala, not because he was a billionaire, but because his family had destroyed hers. Nathan took a deep breath, his hands curling into tight fists at his sides. She hated him, and now he finally understood why. Silence loomed between them. Caroline watched him, waiting for a response. Nathan closed his eyes, struggling to contain the storm raging inside him. He couldn't change the past, but he knew one thing. He had to change the future. When he opened his eyes, his gaze no longer held the desire to simply conquer her. It held determination. No matter what it took, he wouldn't let her walk away from him. Chapter 5. A Chance Encounter. She was truly unlike anyone else. That afternoon, Nathan had just finished a long meeting and was on his way back to the mansion, his mind preoccupied with countless critical decisions about the company's restructuring. But then, something on the side of the road made him slam on the brakes. Up ahead, just off the bustling street, Caroline was kneeling down, handing out meals to the homeless. Nathan sat motionless in his car, his eyes locked onto her. She wore a simple sweater, her hair neatly tied back, yet her face held a gentle smile as she handed a steaming meal to an elderly man curled up in the corner of the sidewalk. She didn't just give food, she sat down with them. She talked to them. She listened to them. Her eyes held warmth, not pity but genuine kindness. Something he had never seen before. Nathan had never met anyone like her, a woman who had lost everything. A woman still struggling to take care of her younger brother, to support her father, to simply survive, yet she still gave. He had always assumed that those who had suffered loss would become bitter, self-serving, guarded. But Caroline wasn't like that. She wasn't rich. She wasn't privileged. Yet she gave more than anyone he had ever known. A tightness gripped Nathan's chest. He had seen too many people who had everything, yet never knew how to give. And her, she had nothing. But she gave more than anyone else. His feelings for her changed forever. Nathan had never stopped being drawn to her. But in this moment, something inside him shifted. It was no longer just the desire of a man wanting to conquer a woman. It was respect. It was admiration. It was something deeper than anything he had ever understood about love. For the first time, Nathan Wanala felt small before Caroline. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was a challenge, but because she had the purest heart he had ever known. And in that moment, he realized he would do whatever it took to be a man worthy of her. Chapter 6. The effort to right his wrong. Nathan couldn't ignore it anymore. He began digging into the Smith Corporation's downfall. He spent the entire night locked in his office. Before him, his computer screen was filled with old financial reports, merger contracts, and newspaper articles from 3 years ago about the Smith Corporation's bankruptcy. He read each line slowly. Each word felt like a knife stabbing into his pride. And then he saw the truth. His father hadn't just won, he had cheated. Alexander Wanala wasn't just a brilliant businessman who had outplayed a competitor. He had rigged the game. He had played dirty. The Smith Corporation could have been saved, if not for the invisible pressure exerted by secret partners his father had manipulated behind the scenes. William Smith hadn't lost because he was weak. He had been pushed off a cliff, torn apart by a system that was never meant to be fair. Nathan felt sick, not just because of what his father had done, but because of himself, because he had once never cared about the consequences of that deal, because he had been a part of this ruthless machine. Nathan had never felt so powerless. He leaned back in his chair, burying his face in his hands. He couldn't begin to imagine the pain Caroline had endured. Losing everything, being pushed to the brink of ruin, having to abandon her dreams, her privileged life, just to become a maid, scraping together every penny to support her younger brother and pay for her father's hospital bills. And now she was surviving in the very house of the people who had destroyed her family. Nathan felt his pride shatter. Every effort he had made, every attempt to win her over, every test he had put her through, felt meaningless now. She could never love him. She could never look at him without remembering what his family had done. But he could still do something. He couldn't change the past, but he could try to fix it. Nathan knew nothing in this world could erase the damage his father had done, but he would still try. He picked up his phone and dialed one of his most trusted associates, a top financial lawyer. "I need you to reinvestigate the Smith Corporation acquisition. Look for any legal loopholes for an appeal or possible restitution." "Nathan, that deal was closed 3 years ago. Why are you suddenly—" "Just do it." His voice left no room for argument. Then he set up an anonymous financial fund, a fund that would secretly help Caroline's family, her brother, her father's hospital bills, if possible, even her father himself, to give them a chance to stand on their feet again. But Caroline could never know, because if she did, she would refuse it. She didn't need his pity, but this wasn't pity. This was guilt. This was atonement. Because Nathan couldn't live with himself, knowing that the only woman he wanted by his side was the same woman whose life his family had destroyed. Chapter 8. A journey together, a true connection. Nathan couldn't shake the image of Caroline kneeling down, handing out meals to the homeless, her eyes filled with a warmth and sincerity he had never seen in anyone else. That image stayed with him for days. And then one afternoon, as Caroline busied herself in the kitchen preparing dinner, he walked in. "I want to join you." She looked up, slightly surprised. "What?" Nathan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Your charity work," he said slowly, each word laced with conviction. I want to be a part of it. Caroline blinked, studying him for a long moment. He wasn't joking. There was no arrogance, no amusement, just genuine sincerity, something she had never seen in him before. I'm visiting an orphanage this weekend, she finally said, her tone calm. Are you sure you want to come? Nathan smirked slightly, but there was no self-satisfaction in his expression. Absolutely sure. A world he had never known. That weekend, Nathan Wanala, a man who had always surrounded himself with wealth and power, stepped into a world completely foreign to him, an orphanage. The moment they walked in, the children swarmed Caroline. They squealed with joy, hugging her, chattering excitedly about everything that had happened during the week. Nathan stood still for a moment, watching the scene unfold. It was overwhelming. She belonged here. Not in a world of luxury, not in a battlefield of corporate power plays, but in a place where love was given freely. Caroline turned back and noticed him still standing there. She let out a soft laugh. Don't tell me you're afraid of kids? Nathan raised an eyebrow and took a step forward. I've just never been around this many before. She shook her head and shoved a box of crayons into his hand. Well then, here's your chance. The moment everything changed. That afternoon, for the first time in his life, Nathan sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by children, listening to their stories. One kid proudly showed him a drawing. Another asked if he was a superhero because he looked like Iron Man. From a distance, Caroline watched him. A strange emotion settled in her chest. She had never imagined she would see Nathan Wanala, a billionaire so used to his world of privilege, laughing and playing among a group of orphan children. But what surprised her even more was that he wasn't faking it. He wasn't doing this to impress her. He was actually trying. A conversation that meant more than words. When the children finally ran off to play, the two of them sat together on a bench under the shade of a tree. For the first time, they talked without walls between them. About childhood, about loss, about what truly mattered in life. Nathan spoke about his mother, a woman who had once been gentle, but had been hardened by the ruthless world around her. Caroline spoke about her father, a man who had once been strong, but had been crushed under the weight of injustice. For the first time, they truly understood each other. Not as a billionaire and a maid, not as a man who had everything and a woman who had lost it all, but as two people, learning how to heal their own wounds. Nathan turned to Caroline, watching as the golden afternoon light illuminated her face, making her blue eyes shine. And in that moment, he knew. He had found something he had never had before, someone who made him want to be a better man. Chapter 9. Love Between Two Worlds. Caroline no longer understood Nathan Wanala. He was no longer the cold, arrogant man she once knew. He no longer tried to flirt with her in that overbearing way. Gone were the teasing smirks, the provocative glances, the invitations she always turned down. Instead, he had changed. She started noticing strange things. The debts she had been struggling to pay for over a year were mysteriously disappearing. Her younger brother Ethan's tuition was suddenly fully covered. Her father's doctor reduced hospital fees, saying an anonymous organization had stepped in to help. She knew. She didn't need to ask. She already knew who was behind this. But what she didn't understand was why. A night of pouring rain. That night, the rain came down in heavy sheets. Caroline was cleaning the dining room, the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the windows filling the quiet space, the wind howling softly outside. She had just finished wiping down the long table, her fingers tightening around the damp cloth. This job had become second nature to her, a repetitive cycle that never changed. Then footsteps. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Nathan. He stood there silent. The warm glow of the overhead lights cast sharp angles on his face, his dark eyes fixed on her, as if there were 1,000 things he wanted to say but couldn't. Caroline frowned, gripping the cloth in her hands. Mr. Wanala, I haven't finished my work yet. Her voice was cold, distant, but Nathan didn't care about that. Slowly, he held out an envelope. Caroline glanced at it briefly, but instead of taking it, she crossed her arms. If this is another check, I suggest you save yourself the trouble. She lifted her chin, her icy blue eyes colder than the rain outside. Nathan didn't withdraw his hand. It's not money, he said, his deep voice steady. Caroline's brows furrowed, suspicion flashing in her gaze. After a moment, she reached out and took the envelope. She opened it. Inside, there was no money. It was a job offer. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. Caroline's body tensed. The words on the paper were clear. Job offer, Wanala Community Development Fund. She looked up, disbelief in her eyes. Nathan had walked away from his father's empire. He had created something new, a foundation dedicated to charitable projects, small business support, and education for underprivileged children. And now he was offering her a place in it. You're trying to atone, aren't you? Her voice wasn't loud, it didn't waver, but the bitterness in it was enough to cut through the air between them. Nathan held her gaze for a long time. The Nathan she once knew would have smirked, thrown back a teasing remark. But the man standing before her did none of that. He simply stood there, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. I can't change the past, he said slowly, his voice low and heavy with an unspoken weight. But I can change the future. A choice that wasn't easy. Caroline felt like something was clenching around her chest. She wanted to be angry, wanted to throw the envelope back at him, wanted to scream that nothing could erase what his father had done to her family. But she couldn't, because this wasn't a check meant to buy her silence. This was an opportunity to work for what she earned, not to be pitied, an opportunity to break free from the life of a maid, to start fresh. She bit her lip, staring at him for a long moment. Why me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan took a deep breath. Because you deserve better than this. Caroline clenched her jaw, her chest tightening. She wanted to say no, but deep down she knew this was no longer just about her. She had a younger brother to think about, a future to fight for, and most importantly, this job mattered. She could make a difference. She could help others, just as she had always wanted. And maybe it was time to stop running. Caroline took a slow, deep breath, gripping the letter tightly. Then, with eyes that were no longer cold, she gave a small nod. I'll think about it. Nathan smiled softly. This wasn't a victory, but it was a beginning. Caroline was no longer sure of anything. She had convinced herself that she would always hate him, but now she wasn't sure she could. Nathan had never asked for her forgiveness. He had never begged for redemption. He had simply stayed, quietly, steadily, changing, not for himself, but for her. And that made her heart falter. She looked at him now, standing beneath the dim glow of the lights, his hair still damp from the rain, his eyes holding nothing but raw sincerity. She wanted to hate him, but she couldn't, because her heart had already started to lean toward him. Chapter 10. Reform, Nathan's fight to make things right. Nathan never thought he would one day stand against the very system that had created him. But now he had no choice. He couldn't turn his back on the truth. He couldn't ignore the way his father had built the Wanala Empire, on ruthless acquisitions, unethical deals, and power plays that crushed anyone who stood in the way. That was how his father did business. But it wouldn't be how he did. Nathan stood at the tallest window of Wanala Corporation's headquarters, looking down at the city below. 3 years ago, this very place had destroyed Caroline's family. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the way this company operated, and that change started now. The next morning, Nathan summoned the company's executive board. The vast conference room where so many ruthless deals had been made now echoed with his firm, unwavering voice. Starting today, Wanala Corporation will take a new direction. Stunned silence. Wealthy shareholders, powerful executives. Not one of them had expected this decision. Nathan cut off every unethical deal. He implemented a transparent system to ensure that all of Wanala's transactions were built on fair competition. He ordered a full review of past acquisitions, searching for ways to compensate the businesses that had been crushed under his father's regime. He established a fund to support small businesses, ensuring they wouldn't be suffocated by financial giants like Wanala had once been. Executives who had built their careers on ruthless business tactics resisted. High-ranking directors shook their heads, disbelief in their eyes. Nathan, are you serious? This will kill our competitive edge. Your father would never allow this. The business world has no place for kindness. But Nathan didn't care, because he had seen what happens when greed goes unchecked. He had seen what happened to Caroline's family, and he would never let it happen again. Reforming a corporation was never going to be easy. Nathan faced relentless pressure from shareholders. The media started questioning his decisions. His father's loyalists within the company actively fought against him. But Nathan didn't back down. Every time exhaustion crept in, every time he questioned whether it was worth it, he thought of Caroline. He thought of the pain in her blue eyes the day he confronted her in the library. He thought of how she lost everything, all because of one ruthless business decision made by his father. He wasn't doing this just for her, but she had taught him what was right, and because of that, he couldn't stop. The following month, his reforms took effect. Small businesses that had once been crushed by Wanala Corporation were given the support they needed to rise again. Transparency, fairness, sustainability. That was the new foundation of Wanala Corporation. Nathan was ready to face anyone who tried to stand in his way. He didn't care about losing a few $1 billion, because he was building something worth more than money. He was rebuilding himself. He was finally doing the right thing. And for the first time in his life, Nathan Wanala felt proud of the man he was becoming. Chapter 11. The Return of Nathan's Father. Everything was going well, but Caroline felt uneasy. Nathan had changed too much. He was no longer the arrogant billionaire who controlled everything with money. He had helped her younger brother. He had erased her family's debts. He was trying to fix the damage his father had caused. But deep down, she knew this couldn't end so easily, and she was right, because a ghost from the past had returned. That evening, as Caroline was working in the library, the grand doors of the mansion swung open. A group of men in suits entered, their presence exuding power and intimidation. And leading them was Alexander Wanala, the man she had never met, but had hated her entire life. The man who had destroyed her family. Even at 60, his presence was commanding, his aura cold and ruthless, the kind of power that demanded both respect and fear. The moment he stepped inside, the air in the mansion froze. Caroline clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. Nathan stepped out of his office, his eyes darkening the second he saw his father. "Father!" His voice was icy. Alexander narrowed his eyes, then shifted his sharp gaze toward Caroline. He studied her, as if evaluating a mere commodity, and then he scoffed. "So it's true." Turning to Nathan, his voice was low but filled with disdain. "You really bowed down for the daughter of a failure?" Rage burned in Caroline's veins, but before she could react, Nathan took a step forward, positioning himself between her and his father. "Don't talk about her like that." His voice was frigid. Alexander smirked. "Did you really think I didn't know?" His tone sharpened. "Did you think I wouldn't find out that you've been secretly helping her family, erasing their debts, paying for tuition, setting up financial funds, rebuilding her father's company, reforming the corporation?" Caroline's eyes widened. She hadn't known Nathan had done so much. Alexander's voice hardened. "I built this empire with my own hands, and now you're destroying it, all for a woman?" Nathan's expression didn't waver. "I'm not destroying anything." His voice was calm but unyielding. "I'm fixing what you did wrong." "Fixing?" Alexander laughed coldly. "There is no room for weakness in this world. If her family had been strong enough, they wouldn't have been crushed by me." Caroline's fist tightened so hard that her nails dug into her skin. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him he was a monster. But before she could open her mouth, Nathan spoke first. "I don't care what you think." The room had never felt colder. Alexander Wanala sat in his throne-like chair, his sharp gaze piercing through the silence, like a judge delivering a verdict of betrayal. Nathan stood across from him, unyielding. The battle between two generations had reached its climax. Alexander tapped his fingers against the polished wood of his desk. Slow, deliberate, menacing. "You've gone too far, Nathan." His voice was low, filled with quiet authority. "I've been silent long enough, watching you. But this ends now." Nathan didn't flinch. He had known this moment would come. Alexander leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Stop what you're doing. Shut down that ridiculous charity fund. Cut ties with that girl immediately. That girl, the way he spoke about Caroline as if she were nothing, sent a slow, simmering rage through Nathan's veins. His fists clenched. And if I don't? His voice was steady, but there was an edge of defiance. Alexander let out a cold laugh. If you don't, his tone turned sharper, then you are no longer the heir to Wanala Corporation? A deadly silence settled over the room. Nathan took a deep breath. He wasn't surprised. He had known his father would use this against him. Alexander Wanala believed that money was the ultimate power, but this time, he had miscalculated his own son. Nathan met his father's gaze, his voice calm, unwavering, and without fear. If you think I would choose your fortune over Caroline, then you're wrong. For the first time in his entire life, Alexander blinked, his expression momentarily stunned. What did you just say? His voice was dangerously low. Nathan's jaw tightened, every word cutting the last remaining ties between them. I'm leaving Wanala Corporation. I'm walking away from everything. I'll build from the ground up. A flicker of shock passed through Alexander's normally unreadable face. You're giving up billions for a woman? His voice rose with disbelief. Nathan let out a quiet chuckle, a small, knowing smile, calm, unshaken, defiant. I don't need this family's fortune. He turned, his gaze finding Caroline. I just need her. She stood frozen, as if the world had just collapsed beneath her feet. She couldn't believe it. Alexander inhaled sharply, his eyes darkening. You will regret this, he said, his voice stone cold. You can't rebuild from nothing. Nathan merely shrugged. We'll see. He stepped closer to his father, his tone lowering. But I have a warning for you. Alexander narrowed his eyes. Nathan smirked, but there was no amusement in it. Stop. Stop your dirty business tactics, or you'll lose everything. For a brief second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Alexander's face, but he said nothing. He simply sat there watching as his son turned and walked away without a single glance back. Nathan stepped out of his father's empire, and for the first time, his steps had never felt stronger. He had just given up everything, but he knew this was the right choice because for the first time in his life, he wasn't just following power. He was following what he truly believed in. More than anything, Nathan was no longer alone. Caroline was there, waiting for him. She didn't say a word. She simply looked at him for a long moment. And then, for the first time, she smiled. Not the cold, distant smile she had once used to keep him away. A real one. Software, warm. Nathan didn't need wealth because he had something far greater. A love that was real. Nathan Wanala, born into luxury, a man once too arrogant to care for anyone, had just given up everything. For her. Caroline felt her heart tighten. This wasn't what she wanted. She had never wanted him to sacrifice everything for her, but now he had done it without hesitation. She looked into his eyes. Honest, strong, completely unregretful. Nathan truly didn't care about money or power. He only cared about her. And in that moment, Caroline finally understood. She had fallen in love with him. Chapter 11. A New Beginning. Building something new for those who needed it most. After walking away from his father's empire, Nathan no longer cared about being a billionaire. He had seen too much of what greed could do. Now the only thing he wanted was to build something that truly made a difference. Using his personal fortune, Nathan founded a startup dedicated to community-driven projects. His company supported small businesses, invested in education for underprivileged children, and funded sustainable development initiatives. Everything was transparent, no backroom deals, no exploitation. Nathan was determined to do things right from the start, and when he asked Caroline to join him, she didn't hesitate. She didn't do it for him, she did it because this was what she believed in. From the very beginning, Caroline became his strategic advisor. She helped Nathan structure their charity projects correctly. She ensured funds went where they were supposed to. She oversaw education programs to ensure real impact. And every time Nathan saw her working tirelessly, her eyes lighting up when a project succeeded. He knew he had made the right choice, not just for himself, but because he wanted to walk this path with her. 1 year later, their company had made a powerful difference. Hundreds of underprivileged children were now on full scholarships. Families who had lost everything to corporate greed were given a second chance. Poor communities now had infrastructure, clean water, and renewable energy. Through it all, Caroline became the person Nathan trusted the most. They stood side by side. They built something together, and with each passing day, their bond grew deeper. Nathan was no longer a billionaire who thought he could own everything. Caroline was no longer a woman defined by hatred. They were two people rewriting their story. A story not just about love, but about hope, forgiveness, and rebuilding something beautiful from the ruins of the past. Chapter 16, Exposing the Truth, the Final Battle. Nathan thought he had left his past behind, but his father's shadow hadn't disappeared. Just year after Nathan had walked away from Wanala Corporation and built his own company, a shocking scandal erupted. A large-scale investigation was launched into Wanala Corporation's illegal business practices. Money laundering, tax fraud, market manipulation, everything was being exposed. Nathan stood frozen, watching the news flash across the screen. And then, Alexander Wanala was arrested. Alongside him, several high-ranking board members were being investigated and faced prosecution. The empire that had once ruled the financial world was now crumbling before the eyes of the entire world. Nathan couldn't just stand by and watch. He had left. But he still carried the name Wanala, and if the company collapsed completely, thousands of employees would lose their jobs. Hundreds of families would suffer. He had to go back. For years, Nathan had fought against his father. Now, for the first time, he walked back into the boardroom of Wanala Corporation. But this time, he was no longer the arrogant heir of Alexander Wanala. He was a true leader, a man determined to rebuild from the ashes, to dismantle the corrupt empire his father had created and replace it with something just. Nathan dissolved the old leadership. He removed everyone involved in illegal transactions. He restructured the company, transforming it into a sustainable, transparent, and fair organization. And this time, he wasn't alone. Caroline wasn't just the woman he loved. She was the woman who had taught him what was right. And together, they weren't just rebuilding a company, they were rebuilding a legacy. A gray afternoon, Nathan and Caroline stepped through the heavy iron gates of the prison where Alexander Wanala was being held. For the first time in years, Nathan looked at his father, not with fear, not with anger, but with something else. Understanding, empathy. Alexander looked older. The powerful, cold-hearted businessman was gone. What remained was an aging man, hollowed out by the very world he had once controlled. A world without rules, a world that had finally turned against him. When Alexander's gaze fell upon Caroline, something unexpected flickered in his eyes. Regret. He inhaled deeply, as if struggling to find the words. And then slowly he spoke. "I owe you an apology, Caroline." Caroline lifted her head, her icy blue eyes colder than ever. For a moment, Nathan thought she wouldn't accept it. She had every right not to. But then, after a long silence, she gave a small nod. Not out of forgiveness, but because she refused to let hatred control her anymore. They had endured too much. Now it was time to move forward. After everything, after the storms had passed, after the battles had been fought and won, Nathan knew he couldn't wait any longer. One evening on the rooftop of his penthouse with the city lights shimmering beneath him, he knelt down. Caroline's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Once they had been enemies. Once they had belonged to two different worlds. But now they had overcome everything together. Nathan looked up at her, his voice steady, filled with nothing but love. "Caroline, you are the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me. I can't change the past, but I want to spend my life making you happy. Marry me." Caroline let out a small laugh, but tears had already begun rolling down her cheeks. She didn't need to think. Yes, not a grand, extravagant event. Not a wedding meant for the elite. Nathan and Caroline chose a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded only by the people who truly mattered. No designer gowns, no extravagant jewelry. Yet as Nathan looked at her, standing before him, she was more beautiful than anyone he had ever seen, because she was the woman he loved with every part of himself. And as he slipped the ring onto her finger, Nathan knew. This was the beginning of a new journey. No dark past, no mistakes to haunt them. Only a future, one they would build together, with love, trust, and the unshakable belief that they could change the world. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.